Welcome back to our daily Bible study. I am Matthew Gage, pastor at Faith Baptist Church in Decatur, Texas. We're going to be in Genesis chapter number 41 today. Genesis chapter number 41, and pretty lengthy chapter here, 57 verses. And it's kind of scary when it's on parts of 4 different pages in my Bible. So we'll try to get through this in a timely fashion. But we're continuing, of course, the life of Joseph, where we just saw him in the previous chapter. He was in prison. God had promoted him and blessed him there. He's something of an assistant jailer or warden or trustee. And we saw the events where a couple of prisoners who had ties back to Pharaoh's palace had been there, had both dreamed dreams. Joseph had interpreted them, and the butler's good, the baker's bad, and had asked that the butler, when he was restored back to being in Pharaoh's presence, would remember Joseph and kind of return the favor and bring up his plight to Pharaoh and maybe some freedom or something, but something would go to his benefit there. Well, we saw at the close of chapter number 40 that the butler had forgot when he was restored. So we have Joseph still in prison where we begin here in chapter number 41. So let's just jump right on in. Genesis 41, verse number 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by there. Now stop right there real quick. 2 full years. The butler just forgot, failed to mention for 2 full years that Joseph, what he had done for him, and till this event in this series of events brings it back to his memory. So in this dream, we see that Pharaoh is staying by the river, verse number 2. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow. Now, there's a couple times in this chapter we have some, I don't even want to use the word archaic necessarily. The word kine we don't use near as much anymore. In fact, outside of Scripture, you really don't see it. There's some other language we'll get to in a minute it's more of a British use of the words, and I want to point out to you that we here in America could very easily misinterpret something coming up. But this word kine here, that's just an old word. It's for the plural of cows. So something like cattle, but it's a word that is in the King James Bible, and it just means a group of cows, a plurality of cows. So 7 fat, big, healthy cows by the river. And by the way, the river, think about that, where they're at in Egypt. He's seeing this river. Well, the river is the lifeblood of Egypt. Why is Egypt not a desert and a wilderness like so much of the rest of the area there in Africa? It's because that life-giving water that comes up the Nile and all its little branches and the floodplains and different things, the Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt. So I think that's important to note there when he sees the river. That's the Nile River, and like I said, all their sustenance ties back to the Nile. So 7 fat cows, verse 4. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kind did eat up. I skipped to verse 3. Verse 3. And behold, 7 other kind came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kind upon the brink of the river. So we've got 7 fat cows, 7 very skinny, skin and bones cows standing next to them. Verse 4, and the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kind did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kind. So Pharaoh awoke. So in his dream, these 7 cows devour the 7 weak or bag of bones cows, devour the fat and healthy cows, and Pharaoh awakes. Now, that's a very strange dream. We have strange dreams, and maybe in his mind thinking, well, it may not be anything to us. It's one of those crazy things. I shouldn't eat those tamales and enchiladas and chips and salsa before I went to bed, or whatever they ate there in Egypt. But it goes on, verse number 5. And he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 years of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. Now, here's the next thing I want to talk about here with some etymology and things with some words. It's very easy to do here. Now, to the American reader, we see ear of corn. And what do we think of? We think of something about, yay long. It's got a bunch of little yellow kernels on it. And, you roast it, you put butter on it, you eat it, corn on the cob. You cut off those kernels and you can have whole kernel corn. You can make cream style corn. But that's what we think of. We think of, yellow kernels on a cob when we see an ear of corn. Now, that is a very recent North American, really the last 200, slightly over 200 years, that's the way we would read that here in North America. Someone in Britain reading this verse would not see that imagery. Here's what they would see. The word ear would mean the tip or the part of a plant that's producing grain. So what they'd say, sometimes we call it like a head, like the head coming up on wheat or something like that. But that part there that has the little grains and stuff on it, the seeds, they're using the word ear here. You can double check me on this. You can Google it. You can look at any good dictionary, and you'll find buried down there in the English language, you'll find that the word ear can mean that tip of the plant that produces grain. Now, it also says here corn. This is the other thing we're going to see here, is the word corn is not what North Americans would think of as corn. We think of, like, say, yellow things. We think of what's called maize, Indian corn, those kind of things. But more properly would be called maize. So that's what we see when we see corn. But in a British mind, what this word means is more of a grain or a seed. So what they're saying is, when they say ear of corn, they're seeing that head of wheat or barley and that little clump of grains that's on that, in that individual head. So when they see ear of corn right here, it's not talking about something yellow that you roast and put butter on. No, this is that little clump of seeds that makes up the head of a cereal type producing plant. So like I say, if you don't trust me on that, go look it up. Most dictionaries, English dictionaries that are going to have both of those definitions down there. And by the way, the word corn, that's still preserved in American English. You'll hear things like barley corn or peppercorn, and that is taking that word corn in that grain type sense. So it's not completely lost in North American English, but this is one case that honestly, that was something relatively recent, I got to admit, that I discovered reading through this, because corn as we know it, maize, Indian corn, was something not introduced into Europe or into Africa or the Middle East until after Christopher Columbus and exploring the New World, that plant was brought back over into this more ancient part of the world, into Europe and the Middle East and down into Africa. So this is a historical misinterpretation to read this and think those are yellow ears of corn. What this is more talking about is a little head of wheat or barley. So we have these. It's all coming up on one stalk, and usually a stalk is going to have one head, sometimes two. Having seven is kind of unique there, so that's really catching his eye. And you'll note there that they're fat, they're good. These are big heads of grain. Verse number 6, and behold, 7 thin ears and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. So 7 more pop up, and these are smaller, they're weaker, they're dried up, just as if they were grown up in a very dry environment, in a drought, and with a dry wind blowing on them, beating against them. Verse 7, and the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh woke, and behold, it was a dream. So 2 dreams where you have 7 healthy, fat something devoured by 7 weak, dry, unhealthy, skinny things is the common interpretation in this. We'll point that out, and when we get in here a little bit, that's where the bulk of the interpretation is going to come from. Verse number 8. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof, And Pharaoh told them his dream, and there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. So, once again, I'm getting I won't say flashbacks, but my mind is going to the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Nobody can interpret the dream until Daniel shows up. We have almost the same story playing out right here. Verse number 9. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. 2 years too late, but at least he remembered. Verse 10. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in the ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man in Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. So just rehashing the story. Hey, we were in prison. We both had this dream. This Hebrew guy told us what it meant. It all came true. And I should have told you about this a long time before now. I promised I would, but hey, 2 years later, I'm sorry, I'm just now bringing this up. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh, which that's what you're going to do. You're going to clean yourself up. Imagine the knock of the door. Hey, we need Joseph. And, he's dressed as a prisoner, nasty, dirty, like I say, prisoner/servant. So I imagine, they do say it takes time. You're going before royalty, before the Pharaoh. So they get him cleaned up, new clothes. And he goes into Pharaoh's court. Verse 15. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. So he's saying, I've heard that you hear a dream, you can tell what it means. Verse 16, Joseph corrects him. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. I like that immediately Joseph is deflecting the praise and saying, it's not me. I'm just Joseph. I'm just your humble servant. But I serve a great God who can solve your problem. Verse 17. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored. They fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the 7 fat kine. When they had eaten them up, it would not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning. So I woke. So I like he adds a little bit more details. It's not just what he dreamed, his interpretation. Now saying, not only did those skinny cows eat the fat cows, but they ate those fat cows, and you couldn't even tell that they had ate anything. Their sides didn't expand. They didn't get healthier. They were still sick and skinny. Verse 22. Continuing on with his report of the dream. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind sprang up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, and there was none that could declare it to me. So here's the situation. Here's 2 dreams. I've told all the smartest people in the kingdom. No one can tell me what this means. So, Joseph, here it is. Verse 25. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. And here's the interpretation, verse 26. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. So, once again, linking these 2 dreams, that the good are, there's the representations of 2 sevens here. Good the good 7, and then the bad 7. The good 7 represented by the 7 fat cows, the 7 ears of grain, and then the 7 lean ears is seen by the 7 sick cows, skinny cows, and the 7 smaller, weaker ears of grain. Verse 27. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty years blasted with east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of plenty, of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall rise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So, interpretation of the dream, he lays it out. So, Pharaoh, God showed you this twice. God repeated himself. He wants you to know this is sure, this is set. And you need to get prepared, because there's going to be 7 years where we're going to have plenty, followed by 7 years where we're not going to have much. And we got to be prepared for those 7 years, because there's not going to be enough food to sustain us during those. Verse 33. Now Joseph is going to give some advice, and this is coming, I think, from his experience, also godly wisdom that's with him. But think about his history and his experience in managing a household and helping manage the prison. He's got managerial experience. So knowing this, he says, Pharaoh, here's my 2 cents. This is what you ought to do. Verse 33. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. So, here's his advice saying, let's save stuff. Let's save 20% of the food, 1/5 of it. All that we produce, we'll store it up. And by the way, archaeologists have found these great big granaries and storage facilities that likely are from this time. So there's even archaeological proof that could show that this truly happened. Verse 37. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this? This is a man in whom the Spirit of God is. So as Pharaoh looks around at his court of advisors, of course, now most of them, they're the ones that just failed him with the dream, so he's not happy with them to begin with. But as he looks around, he says, well, I can't think of anybody better to take care of this than this man who just showed us what to do and gave us some good advice here. So verse 39, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. So basically, a lot of people say that Joseph becomes the prime minister of sorts over the land of Egypt. That, he is in command, has practically unlimited power, only usurped by Pharaoh. Even then, in certain situations when he's sitting on his royal throne. So it sounds like, in spite of this emergency dictatorship, if you will, that Joseph is being appointed to, there's the one check of Pharaoh's power, but even that, there's times that Joseph could overrule the Pharaoh. So I think it's amazing the amount of power that the Pharaoh is giving over to Joseph. Verse 41, Joseph said I don't know how I keep seeing Pharaoh and reading Joseph, but I do. Verse 41, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the 2nd chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. So, like I say, he's now promoted, not just promoted in private, but makes it very public. Gives them a ring, which rings would have had like the royal signet, the royal seal. So it gives him all the powers of Pharaoh. And when they go out in these processions and things, there's Pharaoh in the place of honor, but right behind him in the second place, there's Joseph. So everybody knows Joseph has been elevated. Everybody knows Joseph is in charge. Verse 44. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah. I hope I'm close on that, which, according to what I understand, that means something along the lines of person who reveals secrets, or a person to whom secrets are revealed. That's what the name means. It says, continuing, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Now, some people see this Potiphera that's mentioned here and say, oh, well, that must be Potiphar from before. It's not. I don't believe the same person. I think it just happens to be a popular name. It's kind of like we get to the New Testament. How many Marys are there? How many Jameses are there? There's quite a few. This just happens to be a name that's used in the land of Egypt. And besides that, this one is particularly said that he's associated with the priesthood of On, while the other Potiphar from earlier had something to do with military or something. So just even the details about these people are not the same. Then he closes that. Of course, now you see that Joseph going out all over the land of Egypt. He jumps right on his task. He knows what he's supposed to do, so he gets to work. He's going out making preparations, making the proclamation, telling everybody what's coming, telling them what the plan is. And of course, they got to start building silos and granaries and things to help store the food. So all the bureaucracy, all the building plans are now, coming in, and they're getting prepared for this massive task where for 7 years they're going to be laying up and storing food to make it through the 7 lean years that would follow. Verse 46. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. So Joseph in his task, like I say, he's taking up this grain, whether that's through taxation or just purchasing, we're really not sure. Probably some sort of a tax, just kind of, hey, your Pharaoh demands this, you will turn it over, kind of thing. Just kind of, Egypt kind of has that reputation for giving Pharaoh, godlike powers. So that's probably more along the lines of what happened. So, but he's going out, and you see how successful he is, that just as you can't count the number of grains of sand on the sea, he's got so much grain, so much barley, so much wheat, these things. He's got so much of it stockpiled that basically their calculators can't go up that high. They're breaking their spreadsheets. They can't even figure out how much they have. It just far exceeds their calculations. So that they seem to be pretty well prepared, and they'll prove that they are. Verse number 50. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bare unto him. Verse 51, and Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, he said, he hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. The word Manasseh means forgetting. So basically, Joseph is saying, now look where I'm at. I've forgotten all the hard times before, and just looking at the blessings I have now. Verse 52, and the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Ephraim means fruitful. So now he's saying, I've had such a hard time here. It looks like, 10 plus years possibly being there, being a slave. And then, like I say, that roller coaster ride, he went from being in a pit, to being sold to slavery at Potiphar's house, to being head of Potiphar's house, to falsely accused, then in prison. Then he goes up a little bit. Now he's, kind of a warden, assistant jailer there in the prison. But now he's been elevated, and now he's in the palace. And it's just an amazing series of circumstances where, of all the men alive at that time, how many were more powerful than Joseph? Possibly only one, and that was the man he worked alongside, Pharaoh. Verse 53. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. So we've now come to the end of the 7 years of plenty, verse 54. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So this wasn't just the land of Egypt, and we'll see from the accounts coming up. It looks like the entire kind of that Middle East area, all around, the Mediterranean, just all those great ancient civilizations over there were affected. And, the word begins to spread that, well, there's one place that seems to have been prepared for this, and that was the land of Egypt. Verse 55. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all lands. So what you have here, by the way, is an amazing event. And we look back in history, and for some reason, there's a few civilizations that just really have captured the imagination of, Americans and British, kind of European civilization. Egypt is one, Rome is one, the Greeks are another. We're not seem to be as fascinated by the Babylonians or the Persians, but the Egyptians are one group and one culture that has just fascinated the imagination, from the pyramids to the mummies and all these things, and also to their great length of time that they were a world power. World powers come and go, but Egypt, here we're talking, centuries before the birth of Christ, but even when we come to the New Testament age, Egypt is still not a superpower, but still an important place in the world. And the affairs with Rome and Egypt were affecting world events. So how does all that really get started? What puts Egypt on the map? I think you could make the case that what really put Egypt as a world power may be happening right here. Because what's happening in all this is no one's prepared for this except for Egypt. People are coming, they're begging for food. And what can Joseph do? He can charge anything he wants. So that transfer of riches is coming into play. At the end of these 7 years, not only will Egypt have survived and had food for everybody, but they're also now going to end up with a lot of the gold, a lot of the riches, and they've made themselves the power to be looked up to. So why is Egypt such a superpower in history? Right here is just one of the examples where you can see God working in the background in history, and through Joseph and through these events here, I think you see Egypt becoming the superpower that it will be reckoned with throughout the centuries following, millennia following, technically. So anyway, 57 verses. I know I've rambled a lot. We got off onto some etymology and some definitions into some world history. So much going on in this chapter. It's a very, very, very important chapter. But where we close this out, I'll remind you who's on top of the world as far as the place to be. It's Egypt. Who is the man responsible for that? It's Joseph. And who is one of the most powerful men in the world? Well, it's Joseph. That guy his brothers wanted to throw into a pit and kill, and they sold off as a slave. Now he is one of the most powerful men on the face of the earth. And honestly, maybe one of the most powerful men ever in what he accomplished. So that's going to set up the events to come, and we'll get to that next time. I appreciate you watching. I hope it's been a help and a blessing to you.